Just to set the record straight, even these emails which were stolen and hacked into at the University of East Anglia, whatever publication was being referred to in those emails in terms of a desire to leave them out, actually found their way into the fourth assessment report. So, it's one thing for somebody to express anger or anguish in private. It's quite another to translate that into action. And even if somebody did, there are so many checks and balances in the processes and the procedures that we follow in the IPCC. There's not one iota of possibility that something like this would happen.
How then, though, do you explain the language in those emails?
Well, I can tell you privately, when I talk to my friends, I use language much worse than that. This was purely private communications between friends, between colleagues, and they were letting off steam, and I think we should see it as nothing more than that.
Would you use the research department again at East Anglia?
Well, why not? I mean, if they are qualified in professional terms, I certainly would. I don't see any reason why they should be excluded. And the fact is that their actions, their contribution have been totally above board, and they've been completely objective in what they've carried out. So I don't have any reason whatsoever to leave them out if there's a requirement and if they qualify.
You do, though, admit, Dr. Pachauri, that we can only rely on what is likely. There is no definitive evidence, is there, for global warming?
By the time we get definitive evidence, I think it would be much too late. And I don't see any reason why we shouldn't take action, because we know enough to take action. When people make business decisions, they have a certain level of probability of outcomes that they expect and that they are targeting, but they still make those investment decisions. So why can't we, as rational human beings, when we have so much overwhelming evidence to show that climate change is happening as a result of human actions, why don't we take those measures that would help us minimize this probability?
Even before those emails came out, polls were showing weakening support for climate change in the US. Since those emails were leaked, we're seeing similar weakening support elsewhere. Does that worry you?
I'm not deeply concerned. If you look at the US, I think the extent of awareness that has increased over the last 2 or 3 years is quite impressive. They still have a long way to go, I realize, but I think compared to where they were, I think the US has moved quite a bit.
As you know, there is enormous political pressure at the national and international level to pass legislation that will supposedly stop global warming. Hi, I'm Christy Pelletier, and I'm very concerned about the science that's being used to justify this legislation. Every politician who supports this very dangerous legislation cites the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, as the reason that man is responsible for the warming in the 20th century.
The recent report by the IPCC, written by hundreds of scientists from around the world and peer-reviewed by many more, including NOAA scientist Susan Solomon, confirms conclusively that the Earth is warming due to human activity.
The IPCC is supposed to be the premier scientific organization studying the global warming issue. But is it? Or is it something else entirely? Let's take a look. The 2007 IPCC Summary for Policymakers strongly asserts that there is now enough evidence to say that it is very likely that man has caused the warming of the 20th century. That translates into a 90% certainty that man is causing global warming. Yet their conclusions are highly suspect. Just how unbiased is the IPCC? After years of being stonewalled, climate analyst John McClain had to use the Freedom of Information Act to force the United Nations to release internal data on just how many scientists actually agreed with the conclusion that there is a 90% certainty that man is responsible for global warming. The results are shocking. The United Nations has created the myth that there is a consensus of thousands of scientists that man is causing global warming. In actuality, only 62, not hundreds or thousands of scientists were actually involved in reviewing the IPCC science chapter. Of this 62, 31, or half, had a vested interest in supporting the man-caused theory. Review comments that didn't support the IPCC's conclusions were ignored by the IPCC. Nearly 60% of the comments for the final draft fell into this category. I was shocked to learn that out of all of these scientists, only 4 agreed with the conclusions of the IPCC. That's right, only 4. That is the United Nations so-called scientific consensus of thousands of scientists. The IPCC myth is false, blatantly false. The United States EPA even suppressed an internal report criticizing the IPCC's conclusions. At best, the IPCC's report is highly biased and cannot be used to justify policy. At worst, the report is a deliberate effort to corrupt the scientific process to arrive at a preconceived conclusion. This conclusion is designed to deceive politicians into creating policy. Creating dangerous policy is exactly what our Congress is doing. The biased nature of this report, combined with the overwhelming recent scientific results showing that carbon dioxide is not responsible for global warming, has led over 600 internationally recognized scientists, some of them former IPCC team members and authors, to abandon the man-caused global warming theory. Think about this for a minute. For every IPCC PhD scientist who supports the IPCC's conclusions, there are hundreds, if not thousands, who disagree. The IPCC is not a scientific organization. It is an agenda-driven political machine that is perpetrating a fraud on the citizens of the world. So why are we even considering this legislation? This cap-and-trade bill must not pass. If you've never contacted your senators before, please do it now. You can contact them at www.congress.org. Tell them that unless they vote no on this dangerous cap-and-trade legislation, you will not be voting for them. Tell them that the IPCC is a fraud and is not to be trusted. Let's stop this horrible legislation together by passing the link for this video on to others that we know. Thank you so much for your time.
The most common failing I find is in the selective use of evidence. People, perhaps naturally, tend to reject evidence that contradicts their favorite theory or hypothesis. That's quite common. It's now been institutionalized in the following sense. Take the IPCC, for example, the UN panel on climate change. They write fairly decent reports. The reports typically are 800 to 1,000 pages without index. Nobody can read them, really, unless you, like myself, unless you're one of the reviewers and you have read through the report. And then a small group of government scientists gets together and writes a summary for policymakers. The ones that I've seen are very selective. They reject evidence that would cast any doubt on human causes of global warming. And naturally then they come up with statements like there's evidence for human causes of global warming. They have to be careful because the report itself doesn't say that. But you can word the summary in such a way as to suggest that the preponderance of evidence or the balance of evidence suggests human causes. And that's what they do. I have long argued that instead of a summary for policymakers, we need a policy for summary makers.
Oftentimes, the summaries are much more strident and definitive than the following text. I think that's quite clear in the third assessment report. But there's also some very strange things that happen in the making of the overall reports. In the one that's on the table right now, in early draft, there was a wonderful illustration showing all the, it's like a table with lines on it that showed all the places around the Earth for the last 11,000 years where it had been warmer than it was prior to the Industrial Revolution, somewhere back between now and 11,000 years ago. And right up on the top, near the north end of this thing, was a big streak that indicated about 4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer for Siberia and North Russia and North Eurasia from about 3,500 years ago to 11,000 years ago. 7,000 years plus where it was warmer. And it had the reference in the scientific literature where it came from, McDonald et al., from the geography department at UCLA. When the next draft came around, it was missing. It was gone. Everybody knows this guy's work. We called him up. Hey, did somebody refute your work on the tree line? No. Why did it disappear? I haven't a clue. The IPCC is not peer-reviewed in the strict sense, because in the IPCC, the people that write the thing get to decide what reviews they want to listen to. In other words, if they don't like what somebody said, we don't necessarily have to pay attention to that.